No one expected that an ordinary afternoon, the kind where sunlight lies lazily across the fields and the wind carries the smell of newly dried corn, would become the moment Diep had feared and longed for at the same time. She had just finished watering the garden, her hands still damp with soil, when she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, careful, familiar in a way that made her heart stop. She turned, and there he was. James, the man she had promised herself to forget, the man who disappeared without a word, leaving only silence, rumors, and a hollow ache in her chest. For a second, she wondered if she was imagining him, if exhaustion had painted a ghost in front of her eyes. But the sun caught on his hair, and she saw the truth. He looked real, too real, and far too changed. His clothes were simple, worn from labor. His hands, once smooth from the life of a CEO, were now covered in scratches, hardened by work. His face carried shadows she had never seen before. It was as if he had lived several lifetimes in the months they'd been apart. "Diep," he said softly. Her breath caught. That voice, gentle, deep, and trembling, opened every door she had tried to close. But she did not move toward him. She did not speak his name. Instead, the first thing she felt was anger. "Why are you here?" Her voice shook, but she forced her chin up. "Why now, James, after everything?" He lowered his eyes, as if the ground had more courage than he did. "I didn't disappear because I wanted to. I needed to protect you." Those words hit her like a wave, the kind that drags you under before you can breathe. Protect her? From what? From whom? She had spent countless nights blaming him, resenting him, trying to understand why a man who claimed to love her would leave her behind. But standing in front of her now was someone who looked like he had fought battles she knew nothing about. And suddenly, she felt fear. Fear of the truth she had been begging for, because the truth can heal, but it can also break. James stepped closer, not enough to touch her, but enough for her to see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Diep," he whispered, voice cracking, "I need to tell you everything." She swallowed hard. The wind stilled. Even the leaves seemed to listen. This was the moment she had imagined 1,000 times. But nothing could prepare her for the truth he was about to reveal. The silence between them stretched like a thin thread, fragile, trembling, ready to snap. Diep stood rooted to the spot, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Something in James' posture told her this wasn't just an apology or an explanation. It was a confession, one heavy enough to crush him. "Diep," he began, his voice low. "Everything that happened, it wasn't just because of business troubles. It was because of my father." Her eyes flickered with confusion. "Your father? What does he have to do with you leaving me?" James swallowed hard, as if the words refused to come out. "He's been hiding things he did in the past, and someone found out. Someone dangerous. They wanted revenge, not just on him, but on me, and on you." A chill ran down her spine. Suddenly, the months of silence, the strange tension in his mother's voice, the shadows she sensed around them, all of it made sense in a terrifying way. "Revenge?" she whispered. "James, what are you talking about?" He lifted his gaze to hers, and the pain in his eyes was something she had never seen before.
My father took land that didn't belong to him. He destroyed a family to build his empire. And the son of that family grew up with one purpose: making us pay. Diep gasped. Her hands trembled against her sides. She felt as if the sky had suddenly cracked open. "You mean John?" she breathed. James nodded slowly. That name alone brought back memories she wished she could erase. John's too kind smile, his strange persistence, the lingering feeling that something about him didn't quite fit. Now the puzzle pieces she ignored rearranged themselves into a picture she never wanted to see. "He wanted to hurt me first," James continued, voice shaking. "But when he realized you were the person I cared about most, you became the real target." Diep's knees weakened. She reached for the wall beside her to steady herself. Her heart pounded painfully, like it wanted to break its way out of her chest. "So you left for me?" she whispered. James stepped forward, hesitated, then let the truth fall from his lips like a confession at the edge of a cliff. "I left because staying meant putting you in danger. I left because I was scared. I left because loving you felt like signing your death sentence." For a long moment, Diep couldn't speak. The truth was too heavy, too raw, too tangled with emotions she had buried. Anger, love, betrayal, fear, they swirled inside her like a storm with no end. And yet, a small, fragile part of her whispered, the question she never dared ask: "If you were protecting me, then why does it still feel like you broke my heart anyway?" James closed his eyes. "Because some truths, no matter how noble, still leave scars."
Sometimes life shifts in the quietest moments, like the soft rustle of wind through a half-open window, or the unexpected hum of a melody drifting from a crowded street. And it was in one of those moments, gentle yet strangely unsettling, that Diep's life brushed against a stranger who seemed to carry an entire world of stories in his eyes. That afternoon, the market was livelier than usual. Vendors were calling out their prices, children chased each other around dusty corners, and the sun dipped low as if leaning closer to witness the chaos below. Diep, with her basket full of vegetables, threaded her way through the crowd. She had always been someone who carried kindness naturally, like a scent that followed her wherever she went. Near the edge of the street, she heard it, the thin, trembling sound of a guitar. Not the polished, practiced sound of a stage performer, but the raw, aching voice of an instrument that had lived through hardship. The musician was a homeless man, clothes worn, beard slightly overgrown, but his fingers, they danced on the strings like they remembered better days. People usually passed him by without a second glance, but not Diep. She stopped, listened, and for a moment, it felt as though the world slowed down just enough for two lonely hearts to meet in silence. She walked over and offered him a warm drink she had just bought. The man lifted his eyes, startled, grateful, and hiding something fragile beneath the surface. "Thank you," he whispered, almost as if he had forgotten how kindness felt. What Diep didn't know was that her simple gesture had planted a small spark inside him, a spark that would later grow into something more complicated than gratitude. Because as she walked away, the man put down his guitar. He watched her, not out of malice, but out of a strange familiarity he couldn't explain. Who was she? Why did her presence stir old memories he thought he had buried? He picked up his worn backpack and quietly followed from a distance, curiosity tugging at him like an invisible thread. And when he saw her meet with James, laughing, smiling, alive, something inside him shifted again. Fate, it seemed, was not done weaving its dangerous, delicate web. There are moments when life feels almost too perfect, so gentle, so warm,
that a quiet fear whispers beneath the surface. What if this peace is only the calm before a storm? James didn't believe in superstition, yet that unsettling thought kept returning to him like an echo he could not silence. The day he decided to buy a new phone for Diep had begun with sunlight pouring through his office windows. It should have been an ordinary morning, but the world has a way of shifting beneath our feet when we least expect it. He brought her to a small electronics shop tucked between a bakery and a cafe. The air carried the smell of fresh bread, and for a moment, everything felt beautifully simple. Two people sharing a quiet piece of happiness. Diep's eyes sparkled with surprise when he placed the sleek phone in her hands. "For your studies," James said softly. "For me?" Her voice trembled in disbelief. It was the kind of scene anyone might witness in daily life, a man giving a gift, a girl trying to hide her shy smile. But behind them, unnoticed, stood the homeless guitarist, the man whose story was far from simple. He lingered near the doorway, half hidden by the cafe's shadow. His posture was calm, but his eyes carried a storm. He watched the way James looked at Diep, protective, gentle, almost too perfect. And something in him shifted, as if a memory had sharp teeth and bit into his heart. Who was this girl? Why did she remind him of someone he once lost? And why did James' presence ignite a flicker of jealousy he didn't understand? As James and Diep stepped out of the shop, laughing softly, the man followed from a distance, not close enough to be noticed, not far enough to disappear, just like the troubles creeping into James's life. Because while he walked beside Diep, unaware of the shadow trailing behind them, his company was slowly being strangled by hidden hands. Funds disappearing, decisions twisted, partners backing away without explanation. Life was shifting. Quietly. Sharply. And as evening fell, the homeless man leaned against a lamppost, strumming his guitar with a haunting slowness. Each note seemed to carry a warning, one James had not yet learned to hear. The storm had already begun.
In the end, the story of James and Diep reminds us that every person carries battles we may never see. Some fight against their past, some against fear, and some simply against the weight of being misunderstood. But no matter how heavy life becomes, the heart always finds a way to choose what truly matters. We learn that love is not built on grand gestures, but on quiet moments, on standing beside someone when the world turns its back on them, on listening when silence feels safer, and on believing in each other even when hope seems thin. It is in these small, unwavering acts that trust grows stronger than fear. We also learn that everyone deserves a second chance. People make mistakes, fall into darkness, or lose themselves along the way. But growth begins the moment we decide to face the truth, to be better than who we were yesterday, and to repair the bridges we once burned. James's struggles show that success can crumble in a heartbeat, yet character is revealed in how we rise again. Diep's compassion reminds us that kindness is never wasted. Even a simple act can change the path of someone's life. And the homeless guitarist teaches us that behind every stranger is a story we have yet to understand. Most importantly, this story teaches us that love becomes real only when it is tested. When storms arrive, when secrets come to light, when confusion clouds the heart, those are the moments that reveal whether affection is just a feeling or a promise. Happiness is not something we find, it is something we build, piece by piece, choice by choice, with the courage to stay even when leaving would be easier.